The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as two uniformed officers strode down the center aisle of Riverside Community Center, their heavy boots echoing against the linoleum floor. Senator Marcus Washington stopped mid-sentence, his hand frozen above the podium microphone, watching the approaching figures with the practiced calm of someone who had seen this scenario too many times before. The packed auditorium fell silent, except for the crackle of police radios and the sharp intake of breath from 300 stunned faces. "Senator Washington," the lead officer's voice carried across the room, "we need you to step away from the podium, sir." From the third row, a middle-aged white woman with perfectly coiffed blonde hair and a satisfied smirk watched the scene unfold. Karen Whitfield clutched her cell phone tighter, her manicured nails drumming against its case as she leaned forward in her seat. She had made the call 20 minutes ago, reporting that an unauthorized individual was impersonating a government official at the town hall meeting. Now she watched with the grim satisfaction of someone who believed justice was finally being served. The senator raised both hands slowly, his voice steady, but carrying the weight of exhaustion. "Officers, I am State Senator Marcus Washington. I was invited to speak at this civil rights forum by the Riverside Community Coalition. My identification is in my jacket pocket." The younger officer shifted uncomfortably, recognition dawning in his eyes, but his partner remained focused on the call they had received. "We're going to need to verify that, sir. Please step down from the podium." The community center erupted. Chairs scraped against the floor as people rose to their feet, voices raised in protest and confusion. Maria Rodriguez, the event organizer, pushed through the crowd toward the stage, her face flushed with anger and disbelief. "This is absolutely ridiculous!" Maria's voice cut through the chaos. "Senator Washington has been our keynote speaker for weeks. His office confirmed yesterday. This is harassment, plain and simple." But Karen Whitfield was already standing, her voice shrill above the crowd. "I don't care what you people say, I know who our real representatives are. And that man is not one of them. He doesn't belong here, speaking about things that don't concern him." The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Senator Washington, now flanked by both officers, looked directly at Karen with a mixture of sadness and steely resolve. At 52, he had served in the state legislature for 8 years, fighting for education reform, criminal justice reform, and economic development in underserved communities. He had faced hostile crowds before, but something about this moment felt different, more dangerous. "Ma'am," he said calmly, "I was elected to represent all citizens of this district, including you. This town hall was organized to discuss the Riverside Civil Rights Heritage Trail proposal, a project that would bring historical recognition and tourism revenue to our community." Karen's face reddened. "Don't you dare lecture me about my own community. I've lived here for 30 years. My family has been here for generations. You people come in here with your agendas, trying to change everything we've built." The auditorium buzzed with angry murmurs. Cell phones emerged from pockets and purses, recording the confrontation. Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, an 80-year-old civil rights veteran who had helped organize the original lunch counter sit-ins in Riverside, stood up slowly, her walker clicking against the floor. "Child, Mrs." Patterson's voice carried the authority of someone who had seen decades of struggle. "That man was elected fair and square by the people of this district. If you have issues with his policies, you address them through the proper channels. You don't call the police on a sitting senator doing his job." The lead officer was speaking quietly into his radio, clearly receiving updated information from dispatch. His expression shifted as he listened, and when he finished the conversation, he turned back to Senator Washington with obvious embarrassment. "Senator, we apologize for the interruption. Dispatch has confirmed your identity and status. We'll need to speak with whoever made the false report." Karen's smugness evaporated instantly. False report, I did my civic duty. How was I supposed to know he doesn't look like the senators we usually have around here? The words landed like a physical blow. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees as the full implications of Karen's statement settled over the crowd. Young mother Ashley Chen, who had brought her teenage daughter to hear the senator speak about college opportunities, shook her head in disgust. This is exactly why we need this heritage trail, Ashley said loudly. So people like you can learn about the actual history of this community, instead of living in some fantasy where only certain people belong in positions of power. Senator Washington returned to the podium, his composure intact, but his message now carrying a new urgency. Ladies and gentlemen, what just happened here illustrates precisely why the Riverside Civil Rights Heritage Trail is so important. We cannot allow ignorance and prejudice to masquerade as civic engagement. He gestured toward the crowd, making eye contact with faces both supportive and skeptical. This trail would honor the brave men and women who fought for justice right here in Riverside. People like Mrs. Patterson, who risked her safety to integrate our schools and businesses. People like James Williams, who became our first black firefighter in 1967, despite death threats. People like Dr. Sarah Chen, who opened the first integrated medical practice and treated everyone regardless of race or ability to pay. Karen remained standing, her face now pale, but her stance defiant. This is all revisionist history. You're trying to make us feel guilty about our heritage, about the way things used to be. Some of us are proud of our traditions. Which traditions would those be? Exactly. The question came from David Martinez, a local history teacher who had spent years researching the area's past. The tradition of denying basic rights to your neighbors. The tradition of using intimidation to silence voices you don't want to hear. The meeting was spiraling beyond Maria's control. She stepped to the microphone beside Senator Washington, her voice strained but determined. Everyone, please. We're here to have a civil discussion about a project that would benefit the entire community. The Heritage Trail would include all of Riverside's history, not erase any of it. But Karen wasn't finished. She pushed toward the front of the room, her voice rising to near shouting levels. I know exactly what this is about. You want to tear down our monuments, rename our streets, make our children ashamed of being American. Well, I won't stand for it. Nobody is trying to erase American history. Senator Washington replied calmly. We're trying to tell the complete story, including the parts that have been ignored or forgotten. The Heritage Trail would actually preserve history, not destroy it. Karen laughed bitterly. Preserve history by focusing on every grievance, every complaint. What about the good things? What about the progress we've made? What about the fact that someone like you can stand up there and lecture us? The casual racism in her words sent a ripple of shocked silence through the room. Even some of Karen's potential allies shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Pastor Robert Thompson, who led the largest congregation in Riverside, stood up slowly. Mrs. Whitfield. Pastor Thompson's deep voice carried the moral authority of someone who had counseled his community through decades of change. I've known you for 15 years. I've seen you volunteer at the food bank, help with holiday drives. This anger, this hatred, this isn't who you really are. Karen turned on him with startling viciousness. Don't you dare psychoanalyze me. Robert, you've been compromised just like the rest of them. Your church used to stand for something. Now you let them tell you what to preach, what to think, what to believe. The pastor's wife, Linda Thompson, gasped audibly. She had considered Karen a friend, had invited her to church dinners and community events. The naked hostility in Karen's voice revealed something that had apparently been lurking beneath the surface for years. Senator Washington watched the exchange with growing concern. He had seen communities tear themselves apart over far less contentious issues. His goal tonight had been to build consensus around a project that would bring jobs and tourism to an economically struggling area. Instead, he was witnessing the ugly exposure of deep-seated divisions that threatened to poison any chance of progress. "Mrs. Whitfield," he said carefully, "I understand that change can feel threatening, but the Heritage Trail isn't about assigning blame or creating division. It's about acknowledging the full complexity of our shared history so we can build a better future together." Together. Karen's voice cracked with emotion that seemed equal parts rage and desperation. "You don't want to work together. You want us to apologize for existing, to hand over everything we've built, to pretend that we're the villains in your story." "No one is asking you to apologize for existing," replied Dr. Jennifer Adams, a local psychologist who had been following the exchange with professional interest. "But recognizing historical injustices isn't the same as personal attack. Understanding the past doesn't diminish your worth as a person." Karen whirled toward Dr. Adams with surprising fury. "Oh, spare me the therapy session. I know exactly what this is. It's guilt manipulation. Plain and simple. Make the white people feel bad so they'll go along with whatever you want." The auditorium fell silent again, but this time the quiet felt dangerous. Several people rose from their seats, moving toward the exits. Others pulled out phones, some to record the confrontation, others to call friends and family members who needed to witness what was happening. Maria tried once more to restore order. "Everyone, please. We're neighbors. We're a community. We can disagree about policies without attacking each other personally." But the damage was already spreading beyond the walls of the community center. Social media posts were going live in real time. Local news outlets were receiving tips about the confrontation. Within minutes, the hashtag #Riverside Town Hall was trending locally, carrying video clips and outraged commentary across the region. Karen seemed oblivious to the digital wildfire she had ignited. Her focus remained fixed on Senator Washington, as if he personally represented everything she feared about a changing world. "You want to know what I think about your Heritage Trail? I think it's a monument to victimhood. I think it's designed to make one group of people feel superior to another group of people. I think it's divisive propaganda disguised as education." "Have you actually read the proposal?" asked Tom Bradley, a local business owner who had been quietly supportive of the project. "Because the trail would include sites related to all of Riverside's communities. The Underground Railroad station, yes, but also the Irish settlement from the 1880s, the Italian families who built the railroad, the Mexican farm workers who kept the agricultural economy alive during the Depression." Karen's face flushed deeper. "I don't need to read propaganda to know what it is. I can see through the pretty words to the real agenda underneath." "Which is what, exactly?" Senator Washington asked quietly. Karen hesitated for the first time, perhaps realizing that she was approaching a line she couldn't uncross. But her anger had momentum now, carrying her forward despite her better judgment. "Replacement," she said finally. "Cultural replacement. Demographic replacement. Making us minorities in our own communities." The words fell like stones into still water, creating ripples of shock and recognition. "Mrs. Patterson shook her head sadly, remembering similar language from decades past. The younger attendees looked around in bewilderment, struggling to process the naked hostility they were witnessing. Senator Washington had heard enough. His voice, when he spoke, carried the accumulated weight of generations of struggle and dignity. "Mrs. Whitfield, I want you to listen carefully to what I'm about to say. I was born in Riverside General Hospital, 4 blocks from here. I attended Riverside Elementary, Riverside Middle School, and Riverside High School. I played Little League Baseball at Riverside Park, and had my first job bagging groceries at Morrison's Market on Main Street. He paused, letting his words settle over the room. My grandfather was born here too, in 1923. He wasn't allowed to attend the same schools I graduated from, wasn't allowed to eat at the same restaurants, wasn't allowed to live in the same neighborhoods. But he stayed, because this was his home too. He paid taxes, served in World War II, raised his family, and contributed to this community every single day of his life. Karen's defiance began to waver as the senator continued. My father integrated the fire department in 1962. He faced death threats, vandalism, social ostracism. But he stayed, because this was his home too. He saved lives, including the lives of people who had called him names and tried to drive him away. I'm not replacing anyone, Mrs. Whitfield. I'm not taking anything away from you or your family. I'm simply claiming the same right you have, the right to participate fully in the community where I was born and raised, the right to serve my neighbors, regardless of whether they look like me or think like me or vote like me. The auditorium was completely silent now. The only sound, the hum of air conditioning and the distant traffic on Main Street. Karen stood frozen, her mouth slightly open, as if searching for words that wouldn't come. The Heritage Trail, Senator Washington continued, is about making sure that stories like my grandfather's and my father's aren't forgotten. But it's also about making sure that stories like yours aren't forgotten either. Riverside has room for all of our histories, all of our contributions, all of our dreams for the future. Finally, Karen found her voice again, but it emerged as little more than a whisper. It doesn't feel that way. It feels like everything I grew up believing was wrong, like everything my parents taught me was a lie, like I'm supposed to be ashamed of who I am. For the first time since the confrontation began, Senator Washington's expression softened with something approaching sympathy. Mrs. Whitfield, no one is asking you to be ashamed of who you are. We're asking you to expand your understanding of who we are, all of us, together. The moment of potential reconciliation was interrupted by the arrival of additional police officers and, more ominously, local news crews who had received tips about the confrontation. Bright camera lights flooded the community center as reporters pushed through the crowd, seeking interviews and statements. Karen's face went white as she realized the full implications of what had just occurred. Her false police report against a sitting state senator had been recorded by dozens of cell phones and was already spreading across social media platforms. Her inflammatory statements about replacement and demographics were being broadcast beyond the safe confines of like-minded social circles into the harsh light of public scrutiny. I want to go home, she said plaintively, looking around the room as if searching for allies who might help her escape the consequences of her actions. But the friends and neighbors who might have once offered support were stepping away, creating a circle of empty space around her. Maria Rodriguez approached the microphone one final time, her voice strained but determined. This meeting is officially adjourned. Senator Washington, thank you for your patience and professionalism under extremely difficult circumstances. Everyone else, please exit in an orderly fashion while the police complete their investigation. As the crowd began to disperse, small groups formed in the parking lot, continuing heated discussions about what they had witnessed. Some expressed shock at Karen's behavior, while others admitted they had suspected such attitudes lurked beneath the surface of their seemingly peaceful community. Senator Washington was surrounded by supporters and reporters, fielding questions about whether he would press charges against Karen for filing a false police report. His response was measured and thoughtful, reflecting the careful consideration of someone who understood the broader implications of his decision. I'll be consulting with my legal team and law enforcement about the appropriate response, he told the gathered reporters. But my primary concern right now is healing the divisions that were exposed here tonight and moving forward with constructive dialogue about the Heritage Trail project. The video clips from the town hall meeting went viral overnight. By morning, Riverside Town Hall was trending nationally, with major news outlets picking up the story of the white woman who called police on a black state senator during an official government meeting. Cable news programs dissected every moment of the confrontation, while social media exploded with commentary ranging from outraged support for Senator Washington to defensive explanations of Karen's behavior. Karen Whitfield woke up to find her phone buzzing with hundreds of notifications. Her name, face, and words were being shared across platforms she had never heard of, analyzed by pundits she had never met, discussed by millions of people who now knew her as the embodiment of a particular type of racial hostility. The local confrontation had become a national symbol. She sat in her kitchen, still wearing the same clothes from the night before, scrolling through an endless stream of news articles and social media posts. Her behavior was being compared to other high-profile incidents of white women weaponizing police against black men. Legal experts were speculating about potential charges she might face. Political commentators were using her as an example of broader societal problems. The phone rang, startling her from her doom-scrolling. The caller ID showed her employer's number, Henderson Insurance, where she had worked as a claims adjuster for 12 years. Her supervisor's voice was strained and uncomfortable. "Karen, I'm sure you know why I'm calling. The company has been getting calls all morning. Clients threatening to cancel their policies. Employees uncomfortable about working with you. We're going to need you to take some time off while we figure out how to handle this situation." The call ended abruptly, leaving Karen staring at her phone in disbelief. 12 years of employment, dozens of satisfied customers, a spotless professional record, all of it apparently meaningless in the face of one night's viral infamy. By noon, the local newspaper had published an extensive background piece on the confrontation, including interviews with other attendees and historical context about racial tensions in Riverside. The article revealed that this was not Karen's first controversial public outburst. She had disrupted school board meetings, confronted parents at youth sports events, and filed numerous complaints with city officials about various perceived slights and injustices. More damaging still, the newspaper had obtained public records showing that Karen had made 7 previous calls to police about suspicious individuals in her neighborhood over the past 2 years. In each case, the suspicious individual had been a person of color engaged in completely legal activities, walking, jogging, delivering packages, or visiting friends. The pattern painted a picture of someone who had weaponized law enforcement as a tool of harassment, using the authority of police to intimidate and control people she viewed as unwelcome in her community. The false report against Senator Washington was not an isolated incident, but rather the culmination of years of escalating behavior. As Karen read these revelations about herself, she felt a strange disconnection from the person being described. Yes, she had made those calls, but each one had seemed justified at the time. Yes, she had disrupted those meetings, but only because important issues were being ignored. The newspaper was presenting her legitimate concerns as evidence of pathological behavior. But even as she tried to maintain her sense of righteousness, Karen couldn't shake the memory of Senator Washington's words about his grandfather and father, about their sacrifices and contributions to the same community she claimed to be protecting. She had called him an imposter, a fraud, someone who didn't belong. But his roots in Riverside ran as deep as her own, perhaps deeper. The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming. How could she reconcile her belief that she was defending her community with the growing evidence that she had been terrorizing her neighbors? How could she maintain that her actions were justified when they had resulted in a state senator being removed from a podium by police officers? Meanwhile, across town, Senator Washington was dealing with his own complicated emotions. The viral nature of the confrontation had brought national attention to the Heritage Trail project, which could be beneficial for funding and support. But it had also transformed a local community initiative into a polarizing national symbol, potentially making future cooperation more difficult. His phone had been ringing constantly with interview requests, speaking opportunities, and offers of support from civil rights organizations across the country. While he appreciated the solidarity, he worried that the focus on Karen's behavior was overshadowing the substantive policy discussions the town hall was meant to facilitate. "This isn't about punishment or revenge," he told his chief of staff during a strategy meeting. "It's about creating a community where everyone feels safe and respected. If we turn Karen Whitfield into a villain, we miss the opportunity to address the underlying issues that created this situation." But even as Senator Washington sought to maintain his focus on healing and progress, legal and political pressures were mounting. The state attorney general's office had announced an investigation into Karen's false police report, citing concerns about the misuse of emergency services and potential civil rights violations. The Senate Ethics Committee had also launched an inquiry, not into Senator Washington's behavior, but into the circumstances that had allowed a sitting legislator to be removed from an official government function based on a clearly frivolous complaint. The Ethics Committee investigation would prove to be the thread that unraveled much more than anyone had anticipated. As investigators dug deeper into Karen's pattern of complaints and police calls, they discovered a network of similar behavior across the region. Karen was not an isolated case, but rather part of a broader pattern of weaponizing law enforcement against political opponents and community members of color. The investigation revealed that Karen had been in regular contact with other like-minded individuals through social media groups and online forums, where they shared strategies for disrupting community meetings, challenging minority office holders, and using police reports as tools of intimidation. What had appeared to be spontaneous outbursts were actually part of a coordinated campaign to suppress minority political participation. More shocking still, the investigation uncovered evidence that Karen had been receiving financial support for her activities from outside political groups seeking to destabilize minority communities and undermine civil rights initiatives. Her seemingly grassroots opposition to the Heritage Trail was actually part of a well-funded effort to prevent communities from acknowledging their complete historical narratives. The revelations transformed the entire context of the town hall confrontation. Karen was no longer just an angry neighbor expressing legitimate concerns in an inappropriate way. She was revealed to be a paid operative in a systematic effort to suppress minority voices and maintain white supremacist power structures through seemingly legal means. As news of the investigation's findings began to leak out, Karen found herself increasingly isolated. Friends and family members who had initially offered private support began to distance themselves as the full scope of her activities became clear. The narrative of a concerned citizen voicing legitimate grievances collapsed under the weight of evidence showing deliberate, organized harassment. The psychological pressure was intense. Karen had spent months convinced that she was fighting for justice, defending her community against forces that sought to destroy it. Now she was being portrayed as the very force of destruction she had claimed to oppose. The moral foundation of her entire worldview was crumbling beneath her feet. She tried to reach out to the political groups that had supported her, seeking guidance and reassurance. But those contacts had gone silent, unwilling to be associated with someone whose activities had attracted federal attention. The people who had encouraged her most radical statements and actions were nowhere to be found when she needed them most. 3 weeks after the town hall meeting, Karen received a phone call that would change everything. The voice on the other end was calm and professional, an attorney from the Senate Ethics Committee requesting her voluntary cooperation with their ongoing investigation. The conversation was brief and polite, but the implications were crystal clear. Her actions had attracted the attention of the most powerful legislative body in the state. Mrs. Whitfield, we'd like to give you the opportunity to tell your side of the story, the attorney explained. We're particularly interested in understanding the broader context of your interactions with Senator Washington and other elected officials in your area. Karen's hand shook as she held the phone. The investigation had moved far beyond the simple false police report she had made that night. They knew about the coordinated harassment campaign, the outside funding, the systematic effort to undermine minority political participation. They knew everything. "I want an attorney," she whispered into the phone. "Of course, Mrs. Whitfield. That's your right. We'll be in touch with your legal representation once you've secured counsel." The call ended, leaving Karen alone in her kitchen once again. But this time, the silence felt different. It wasn't the quiet of anticipation, or even fear. It was the hollow quiet of someone who had finally understood the full consequences of their choices. The Senate Ethics Committee hearing was held 6 weeks later in the state Capitol building, broadcast live on multiple television networks and streaming platforms. The marble-columned hearing room was packed with reporters, civil rights advocates, and curious citizens who had followed the story since that night in Riverside. Senator Washington sat at the witness table, impeccably dressed in a navy blue suit, his expression calm but alert. Across the room, Karen Whitfield sat beside her attorney, looking smaller and more fragile than she had appeared in the viral videos. The contrast was striking, the composed dignity of the elected official versus the defensive posture of someone facing serious legal consequences. Committee Chairwoman, Senator Patricia Holmes, a veteran legislator with 3 decades of experience, called the hearing to order with the gravity befitting such an unprecedented situation. Never before had the committee investigated circumstances surrounding the harassment of a sitting senator during an official government function. This hearing will examine the events of March 15th at the Riverside Community Center, Senator Holmes announced, as well as the broader pattern of behavior that led to those events. Our goal is not to assign blame, but to understand how our democratic processes can be protected from abuse and intimidation. Senator Washington was called to testify first, his voice steady as he recounted the events of that night. But more importantly, he provided context about the broader climate of harassment he and other minority officials had faced in recent years. This was not an isolated incident, he told the committee. Over the past 2 years, I've received dozens of frivolous complaints, disruptive interruptions at public events, and what can only be described as systematic attempts to undermine my ability to serve my constituents. He presented documentation of the harassment campaign, screenshots of social media posts coordinating disruptions of his events, copies of identical complaint letters filed with multiple government agencies, evidence of robocalls spreading false information about his positions and background. The false police report that night was particularly dangerous. Senator Washington continued, because it could have escalated into a situation where someone got hurt. When you call armed officers to remove an elected official from a government function based on fabricated concerns, you're not just disrupting a meeting, you're undermining the democratic process itself. The committee members asked detailed questions about the impact of the harassment on Senator Washington's ability to serve his constituents. He described canceled events, increased security costs, and the psychological toll of constantly wondering whether routine public appearances might trigger confrontations. The saddest part, he said quietly, is the message this sends to young people who might consider public service. If they see that elected officials can be subjected to this level of harassment simply for doing their jobs, why would they want to put themselves in that position? When Karen was called to testify, her attorney advised her to invoke her Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination for most questions. But the committee had obtained extensive evidence of her activities through other means, including bank records showing payments from political action committees, phone records documenting coordination with other activists, and social media posts outlining strategies for disrupting minority political participation. The evidence painted a picture that was far more damaging than the original viral video. Karen had not been acting alone or spontaneously. She had been part of a well-funded, coordinated effort to suppress minority voices in politics through harassment, intimidation, and legal system abuse. One particularly damaging piece of evidence was a recorded phone call between Karen and her contact at a political action committee, made 2 days before the town hall meeting. In the call, they discussed strategies for disrupting Senator Washington's presentation and creating optics that would undermine support for the Heritage Trail project. "We need to make him look like he doesn't belong there," Karen's voice said on the recording. "Make it seem like he's forcing himself on the community, like he's not really representing the people." The calculated nature of her actions, revealed through this and other evidence, transformed public perception of the confrontation. This was not a spontaneous outburst from a concerned citizen, but a premeditated attack on democratic participation, orchestrated by political operatives. As the hearing progressed, witnesses from the Riverside community testified about the broader impact of Karen's behavior. Maria Rodriguez described how the harassment campaign had forced them to hire security for community events and had discouraged some residents from participating in local government. Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, now 81 years old, provided perhaps the most powerful testimony of the day. Speaking in a voice that quavered with age, but remained strong with conviction, she drew parallels between Karen's tactics and the systematic intimidation campaigns she had faced during the civil rights movement. "I've seen this before," Mrs. Patterson told the committee. "Different decade, same playbook. Use the law as a weapon. Make participating in democracy so dangerous and unpleasant that people give up and go home. Make them afraid to speak up, afraid to run for office, afraid to demand their rights." She looked directly at Karen as she continued. "Child, you may think you were protecting your community, but you were actually destroying it. You were turning neighbors against each other, using fear and hatred to divide people who should be working together." The hearing room was silent as Mrs. Patterson finished her testimony. The weight of her words, carrying the authority of someone who had experienced both historical and contemporary forms of political intimidation, seemed to settle over everyone present. Pastor Robert Thompson testified about the damage Karen's behavior had caused to community relationships, describing families that had stopped attending church because of the tensions her actions had created. He spoke about the difficulty of healing divisions when some community members felt their basic dignity and belonging were under attack. "Reconciliation requires acknowledgement," Pastor Thompson said. "You can't heal wounds that haven't been properly examined and addressed. Mrs. Whitfield's actions created trauma in our community, and that trauma won't heal until there's accountability." The committee also heard from law enforcement officials who described the dangerous precedent set by false reports targeting elected officials. Police Chief Margaret Sullivan testified that Karen's call had required them to divert resources from genuine emergencies and had put officers in an impossible position. When someone files a false report claiming that an elected official is impersonating a government officer, we have to respond, Chief Sullivan explained. But it puts our officers in the position of potentially arresting someone they know is legitimately serving in office. It's a misuse of emergency services that could have dangerous consequences. She also revealed that Karen's pattern of false reports had led to policy changes in their department, including additional verification procedures that slowed response times for legitimate emergencies. The ripple effects of her behavior extended far beyond the immediate targets of her harassment. As the hearing drew toward its conclusion, Committee Chairwoman Senator Holmes addressed Karen directly. Mrs. Whitfield, this committee recognizes that you chose not to provide testimony today, which is your constitutional right. However, the evidence presented here paints a disturbing picture of systematic harassment targeting elected officials based on their race and political positions. The false police report you filed against Senator Washington was not just a moment of poor judgment. It was part of a coordinated campaign to suppress minority political participation through intimidation and abuse of legal processes. Such behavior strikes at the heart of our democratic system. Karen sat motionless as Senator Holmes continued. This committee will be making recommendations to prevent similar abuses in the future, including potential changes to laws governing false reports against elected officials and enhanced penalties for coordinated harassment campaigns. The hearing concluded with testimony from constitutional law experts about the broader implications of political harassment campaigns and their impact on democratic participation. The consensus was clear. Karen's behavior represented a serious threat to the fundamental principles of representative government. As Karen left the hearing room, escorted by her attorney through a gauntlet of reporters and protesters, she looked like someone who had finally understood the full weight of her actions. The confident, defiant woman who had confronted Senator Washington at the town hall meeting was gone, replaced by someone who appeared genuinely frightened by the consequences she was facing. The aftermath of the Senate Ethics Committee hearing moved swiftly. Within a week, the state attorney general announced criminal charges against Karen Whitfield for filing false police reports, obstruction of government functions, and conspiracy to interfere with civil rights. The charges carried potential prison sentences totaling up to 5 years. More significantly, federal authorities launched their own investigation into the political action committees that had funded Karen's activities. The systematic nature of the harassment campaign, targeting multiple minority officials across several states, had attracted the attention of the FBI's Civil Rights Division. Karen found herself at the center of a federal conspiracy case involving dozens of operatives and millions of dollars in dark money funding. The small-town insurance adjuster had become a key witness in a case that would reshape understanding of how political intimidation campaigns operated in the digital age. Faced with the possibility of decades in federal prison, Karen made the difficult decision to cooperate with investigators. Her attorney negotiated a plea agreement that would reduce her sentence in exchange for testimony about the broader conspiracy she had been part of. The cooperation agreement required Karen to provide detailed information about her contacts with political operatives, the training she had received in harassment tactics, and the financial support she had received for her activities. It was a humiliating process that forced her to confront the full extent of how she had been manipulated and used. As Karen worked with federal investigators, she began to understand how her legitimate concerns about community change had been weaponized by political operatives seeking to suppress minority political participation. Her fears about demographic change, economic displacement, and cultural shift had been deliberately amplified and misdirected toward harassment of her neighbors. The realization was devastating. She had genuinely believed she was protecting her community, defending American values, standing up for forgotten people like herself. Instead, she had been exploited as a tool in a campaign designed to undermine the democratic participation of her fellow citizens. Meanwhile, the Riverside community was grappling with its own process of healing and reconciliation. The Heritage Trail Project had received national attention and significant funding as a result of the controversy. But the divisions exposed by Karen's behavior still needed to be addressed. Senator Washington, despite having every reason to focus on punishment and revenge, chose a different path. He worked with community leaders to organize a series of dialogue sessions where residents could discuss their concerns about change, economic pressures, and cultural tensions in a constructive environment. We can't move forward by pretending this didn't happen, he told a packed community meeting. But we also can't move forward by dividing ourselves into heroes and villains. We need to understand how good people can be led to do harmful things. And we need to create systems that bring out the best in each other rather than the worst. The dialogue sessions were difficult and sometimes contentious, but they provided a forum for residents to express their fears and concerns without resorting to harassment or intimidation. Many people who had remained silent during Karen's campaign of disruption began to speak up about their own experiences and perspectives. Mrs. Patterson, despite her advanced age, became a central figure in the reconciliation process. Her willingness to engage with people who had supported Karen's actions, while maintaining firm boundaries about acceptable behavior, provided a model for others to follow. "I don't hate Karen Whitfield," she said during one dialogue session. "I feel sorry for her. She let fear and outside manipulation turn her into someone she probably never meant to become." But feeling sorry for someone doesn't mean accepting harmful behavior. It means working to prevent it from happening again. The Heritage Trail project moved forward, but with modifications that addressed some of the legitimate concerns that had been raised during the community discussions. The final design included more comprehensive coverage of all of Riverside's communities, additional economic impact studies, and enhanced community input processes. 6 months after the town hall meeting, Karen Whitfield stood before a federal judge for sentencing. She had lost her job, her savings, her social connections, and much of her sense of identity. But she had also gained something she hadn't expected: a clearer understanding of how her actions had affected her community and her neighbors. As part of her plea agreement, Karen had written letters of apology to Senator Washington and other community members she had harassed. The letters were painful to write, but necessary for her own psychological healing as well as community reconciliation. "I want to apologize, not just for my actions, but for the fear and division I created in our community," she wrote to Senator Washington. "I realize now that you were never the threat I believed you to be. The real threat was the hatred and suspicion I allowed to grow in my own heart." The judge sentenced Karen to 18 months in federal prison, followed by 2 years of supervised probation and 500 hours of community service to be performed with civil rights organizations. The sentence was severe enough to reflect the seriousness of her crimes, but lenient enough to recognize her cooperation and expressions of remorse. As Karen was led away to begin her sentence, Senator Washington was asked by reporters whether he felt justice had been served. His response reflected the complexity of someone who had been both victim and witness to a community's struggle with its own demons. "Justice isn't just about punishment," he said. "It's about restoration. It's about making things right, not just making someone pay." Karen Whitfield will serve her time, but the real measure of justice will be whether our community learns from this experience and becomes stronger because of it. The Riverside Civil Rights Heritage Trail was officially opened 1 year after the town hall meeting that had nearly destroyed the project. The dedication ceremony was attended by hundreds of community members, including many who had initially opposed the initiative. The trail told the complete story of Riverside's history: the struggles and triumphs, the failures and successes, the moments of division, and the efforts at reconciliation. It included a section dedicated to recent events, acknowledging the community's ongoing work to build understanding across racial and cultural lines. Senator Washington spoke at the dedication ceremony, standing at the same podium where he had been interrupted by police officers 1 year earlier. But this time, the audience was united in support of the project and the values it represented. "This trail represents more than historical education," he said. "It represents our commitment to learning from the past, acknowledging our mistakes, and building a future where everyone belongs. It represents our belief that diversity makes us stronger, not weaker, and that democracy requires the participation of all citizens, not just those who look like us or think like us. As the ceremony concluded and people began walking the trail, examining the markers, and reading the stories they told, there was a sense of hard-won progress. The community had faced its demons, confronted its divisions, and chosen the difficult path of reconciliation over the easier path of continued conflict. Karen Whitfield, serving her sentence at a federal facility 300 miles away, would not see the Heritage Trail for another year. But when she was eventually released and returned to Riverside, she would find a community that had been fundamentally changed by the events she had set in motion. The town that had once enabled her harassment campaign had become a model for addressing racial tensions and political division through dialogue, accountability, and shared commitment to democratic values. The woman who had tried to silence minority voices had inadvertently created a platform that amplified them more powerfully than ever before. On quiet evenings, Senator Washington would sometimes walk the Heritage Trail, reading the markers and reflecting on the journey that had brought the community to this point. The confrontation with Karen Whitfield had been painful and traumatic, but it had also revealed the resilience and fundamental decency of most of his constituents. The trail ended at a small pavilion overlooking the river that had given Riverside its name. A plaque there read, "Democracy is not a destination, but a journey. It requires the participation of all citizens, the protection of minority voices, and the courage to confront difficult truths about our past and present." May this trail remind us that our strength lies not in our uniformity, but in our unity, despite our differences. As the sun set over the river, casting long shadows across the trail markers, Senator Washington felt a sense of cautious optimism about the future. The work of democracy was never finished, and there would always be those who sought to undermine it through fear and division. But there would also always be those willing to stand up for justice, to build bridges across difference, and to believe in the possibility of a more perfect union. The Heritage Trail would serve as a permanent reminder of both the fragility and the resilience of democratic institutions. It would tell the story of a community that had faced its worst impulses and chosen to become better. And it would stand as a testament to the truth that progress is possible, even in the darkest of times. When people of good faith commit themselves to the hard work of justice and reconciliation. The story of Karen Whitfield and the Riverside Town Hall meeting had ended, but the larger story of American democracy continued. In communities across the nation, similar struggles were playing out, with citizens choosing between fear and hope, division and unity, hatred and love. The Riverside Civil Rights Heritage Trail stood as proof that even when people choose badly, it is never too late to choose better.